Okay, ladies and gentlemen, a little bit of order. We'll take our seats, please. Okay, thanks very much. Thanks very much, everyone. I hope you all enjoyed your trip around the house and your lunch. Thanks very much. I must say the morning was a great session. Thanks to all the presenters and thanks to people for paying attention. Okay. Into session 3, and I'm really delighted to welcome Emer Cook as speaker this afternoon. Emer, you're probably aware, has stepped in at lastminute.com to actually take up this role because I think Caroline and the crew had been chasing someone on Evo's inability to turn up. Caroline is no stranger to Ireland. So she's currently the Executive Director of the European Medicines Agency based in Amsterdam. And she also takes up the role of the Chair of the International Coalition of Medicines Regulatory Authorities for a 2-year term. Emer then was Director responsible for all medical products related regulatory activities in the WHO in Geneva between November 2016 and November 2020. And there she was responsible for leading WHO's global work on regulation of health technologies, that's medicines, vaccines, diagnostics, vector control products and devices, and coordinating the regulatory teams there. And she's working with the member states and international partners to assure the quality, safety and efficacy of appropriate health technologies. Prior to that, Emer is a pharmacist with master's degrees in business and science from Trinity College Dublin. She has years of experience in international regulatory affairs and spending 14 years from 2002 to 2016 in the European Medicines Agency as head of inspections and head of international affairs, respectively. And from September 1998 to July 2002, she worked in the pharmaceutical unit of the European Commission, so plenty of international experience. So welcome and thank Emer for taking the time out to come to speak to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Martin. And yes, I'm a last-minute addition to the programme, and I say COVID works in mysterious ways. So my meeting that I should be in Brussels was cancelled because the chair got COVID. My deputy was meant to be here, got COVID. And I said, here's an opportunity. And I'm delighted that I did. And I'd like to thank Sarah and Caroline for putting it all together so quickly because it really was lastminute.com, and I almost can't believe it actually happened. But I'm really passionate about trying to control antimicrobial resistance, and I think the work that is being done on an Irish level is really exemplary. So I'm not a specialist in AMR, but it is one of our priority action areas in the European Medicines Agency, and of course a huge strategic policy area in the EU. But the key message I want to start with today is really about how we have to work together, because I'm a medicines regulator and I know what I can do in my space. I can regulate medicines, I can talk to developers, I can manage surveillance systems, but I don't know enough what other areas can do. I don't know what can be done in the food safety area. I don't know how much can be done in the environment area. And these are all interconnected areas, and we need to work together to make sure that these things can happen. So I don't think I need to tell you about the challenge of antimicrobial resistance. So I'm just going to go to maybe you're not aware of the Global Antibiotic Research and Development Partnership, and this is a partnership that was set up in conjunction with the UN bodies to accelerate the development of treatments for drug-resistant infections. And what I like about, they're doing great things, but what I like about their figures is they don't just talk about the deaths from drug-resistant antimicrobials, but they talk about the poverty that this leads to in the world, and they talk about the billions of dollars lost due to hospital infections. And I think today there was a figure of 7.5 billion euro quoted. Here we've got, I'm not sure, it shouldn't be right then if it's $13.5 billion in the US and Europe alone. But I think the financial impact of drug-resistant infections is something that we really have to be aware of. So I started off by saying that it's a one health issue and it can only be tackled together. And here, at an Irish level, I see great cooperation between the Department of Agriculture, the Department of Health, and the Environment Protection Agency. But at a European level, we work very closely with some of the other European agencies that are responsible for different aspects of controlling or impact of antimicrobial resistance. So we strongly believe it's something we can only tackle together. So we're working with the ECDC. I heard ECDC mentioned a number of times. I think there was a famous visit in 2019 that seems to have been very positive, both from the perspective of Ireland's response in the first National Action Plan, really showing that, yes, Ireland is doing a great job. But I also work with the European Food Safety Agency because a lot of the issues, of course, have food safety implications, and I work with the European Environment Agency. And one of our common areas, of course, is trying to combat antimicrobial resistance. Of course, it's a huge political agenda, and everywhere you look, you see that there's there's political support for trying to combat antimicrobial resistance. So starting with, and of course it didn't start with the WHO Global Action Plan, which was supported by OIE and the Food and Agriculture Organization. But this did require every country to set up a national action plan. And having worked in WHO for 4 years before I took up this present job, really that's something that makes a huge difference, but you also see the huge differences between countries as they try to tackle this challenge. So, of course, the other areas, you have to have political support if you're going to move in this area. I used to be naive and think that, if we just sat down and rolled up our sleeves, something would happen. But it happens a lot quicker if you get political support for it. So I think you have a job as influencers to try and make sure that this is on the political agenda and it stays on the political agenda, because that's what's going to make a difference. I would say the political agenda and then communication are probably, awareness and communication are probably the two key areas where you need to have a strong focus. So I said it's a global problem, but of course the challenges to address globally, you can't really address it globally because of all the differences. Economic differences means there are differences in investment capabilities for governments to do this. The impact of changing practices has huge implications. If you're trying to identify what the research gaps are, the funding is usually at a national or regional level, so it's hard to do that as well. So trying to get a coordinated approach to something that is truly a global problem is a real challenge. And I think the two last bits of this, which talk about the political will and the learning and communication, are things that you can do and you can really help to make a difference. So let me give you a couple of examples from the regional level. And this is where we're most active, but we have a European One Health action plan against antimicrobial resistance, which was published in 2017. We've got a very, very strong commission from a very strong commitment by the current European Commission. And I don't know if you remember, but the President von der Leyen wrote mission statements, letters to all the new incoming commissioners. And the one she wrote to my commissioner, or the commissioner to whom I directly responsible, Stella Kyriakides, really had a high focus on antimicrobial resistance, not just in the area of medicines, which is my area, but also in the Green Deal, in the Farm to Fork strategy. And of course, there's huge amounts of funding available in under different research entities. So the EU for Health under the HEDEA. We've now got the HERA, the Health Emergency Preparedness and Response Authority, a lot of funding under the Horizon Europe framework, and then I can't remember what this acronym is now, but I have it on another slide, and I will come back to it, but there is a specialized funding available for global coordination of antimicrobial resistance research with 29 countries involved. And of course, we have the European Investment Bank that can help to provide some funding as well. So, of course, the US has also embraced the need for a One Health approach. Interestingly, that the goals include the need for surveillance efforts, international collaboration, the need for partnership, and I think if we're going to address this, it's all about collaboration and partnership. Now, if we come to what medicines regulators are doing, or what we can do, so our main job is to actually authorize the antimicrobials. And where you see H&V, that's human and vet. So we're responsible for the authorization of new antimicrobials coming onto the European market. But there's not so many of them. I had a look. We didn't authorize one single antimicrobial in 2021. 2020 was a much better year. There were 4 or 5. But in the past 5 years, we've only authorized 7 new antimicrobials, and they're not very much used. So I'll talk a little bit about why that is the case, because we really have a market problem, and I think we need to be aware of that. So this is our primary job, but we can only authorize the products if they come to us. So if they're not coming there, we're not doing that. What we can do, and we do, is provide guidance to developers to help them in the development process, so that what they're working on can lead to a product that will be authorized. We're doing quite a bit of work with international regulators through 2 different fora. Martin mentioned that I'm the chair of the International Coalition of Medicines Regulatory Authorities, and I'll tell you a little bit about what we're doing there. But in Europe, we set up a pilot with non-EU regulators during COVID to involve non-EU regulators in our assessment processes. And that's something that we're going to extend to antimicrobial resistance, so from COVID to products that have the potential to help us with antimicrobial resistance. We have a strong role in prudent use of antimicrobials. We have a responsibility to use the tools that are available, the regulatory tools, to see how we can help to address medicines for unmet needs. We have a program for scientific advice where we have early engagement with developers of medicines that tackle AMR, and we've been we've actually reached out to a number of developers to try and get them to come to us, because we want that research to translate into products. And of course, you've heard quite a lot about the new veterinary regulation, which has strong elements of antimicrobial resistance at its core. So let me just tell you a few words about this open initiative. As I said, it was something that we put in place during COVID. Normally, we regulate medicines through involvement of the 27 member states in our assessment activities. And because there was such a need for an aligned approach to COVID vaccines and products, we invited regulators from outside the EU to join our committees so that they could rely on the assessments that we were doing anyway. And in fact, this helped WHO to issue emergency use listing for the same vaccines within 2 days of the European decision. But more importantly, it allowed then 100 countries to register those products, so potentially making those vaccines and therapeutics available to 100 non-EU countries within 14 days of our decision. So the experts participate as experts. They can participate in the discussions. They maintain scientific independence, and they're responsible for the decisions in whatever their jurisdiction is afterwards. And it was really, we set it up just because we felt the need for it. But it's been so successful that we're now looking at how we can expand it to other areas. And the area that we've seen that there is a need for global alignment on regulatory approaches is in the area of antimicrobial resistance. So we've just announced that we're about to move into the antimicrobial resistance space here as well. So I've told you a bit about what we do, but we can do a lot more. And I think one of our challenges is really to keep antimicrobials working. So we have to make sure that use is based on evidence. We have to take our role in promoting prudent use of antimicrobials. We have to be involved in research on the transmissibility of AMR. And we have a responsibility, of course, to ensure that use is reduced as much as possible, but in the interests of animal and public health. So prevention is better than cure. Can we use vaccines instead? You know, a lot of areas where you might, we actually, you know, we want to see how you can move away from the inappropriate use of antibiotics. And I mentioned our role in the development of new antimicrobials. What we're trying to do is to make sure that we have simple, aligned pathways that developers can come to us with. We work together with regulators from outside Europe to make sure that a single development program can work in the various jurisdictions. And we have a small role in looking at what sort of incentives might be possible to incentivize new products that probably are not going to be used. But of course, the area of alternatives, looking at bacteriophages, microbiomes. Again, we need to support developers and see what we can do to help on the discovery and development front. So I mentioned at the beginning that AMR was a key goal in our medicines agency's network strategy. This is the strategy that we've developed with the regulatory authorities, human and veterinary, in all 27 member states. And there are 6 priority actions. And the third one is combating antimicrobial resistance and other emerging health threats. Now, we've got a bit sidetracked with all our work on COVID over the last 18 to 24 months, because a lot of the same experts are involved in, have been involved in the COVID response, so they haven't had the time to really work on the antimicrobial resistance response. But now that things are calming down a little, then we have, we're looking to see, can we reactivate some of the work? So here's just some examples of some of the ongoing initiatives. I can tell you that antimicrobial resistance is mentioned in pretty much every strategy that we're involved with. I think the challenge is how to get it from strategy to practice, and that's what I say to my staff. That's what I say to my colleagues. What is it that's going to make the difference? You know, how do we actually make the difference at ground level? Yeah, I've talked a little bit about international collaboration. There's a huge amount of other activity going on. Also, the Transatlantic Task Force on Antimicrobial Resistance, which dates back to 2009. A lot of data collection, because what we see from the data can help us inform the future strategies. So there is a lot of different activities. I think, again, our challenge is to translate these into concrete deliverables that really make a difference. A couple of words on the work that the Coalition of Medicines regulatory authorities is doing. This is identified AMR as one of the key themes for working together. Again, very caught up with COVID over the last 2 years. So I think the initial call was in 2019, and the activities at the moment are now looking at trying to identify what are best practices internationally, so that other countries can learn from these and see if they can, if their own environments will allow them to take them up. The idea is, again, to raise awareness and communicate, to try and work together from a One Health perspective, and then see if these can work in different national contexts. So some of the ideas that have come out of this include trying to translate some of the ways that we've used regulatory flexibilities from COVID into bringing new antibiotics to the market. Again, similar approaches have been taken for some novel therapies. Trying to look at how we can reduce inappropriate agricultural use of antimicrobial. A lot of countries allow non-prescriptive use of antibiotics, and that is a real challenge for antimicrobial resistance. You see that the highest rates of antimicrobial resistance are in those countries where they have OTC availability. And then I think one of the big challenges is how we fix the business model, and looking at reimbursement models. Yeah, so I'm not. I know I'm getting near to the end of my time here, so I just want to just make you all aware. You know, we're asking companies to develop products, and then we're saying don't use them. So this is, you know, this is not a viable business model. It's no big surprise that we don't have a lot of products in the pipeline. I mean, who's going to develop a product that's not going to be used? So I think there is a real, we have to come up with business models that will allow this to happen. And so we're looking at, you know, a lot of the research funding is push incentives, but we're also looking at would pull incentives work in Europe. Delinked market entry or adapted market entry. We've just seen that the UK has come out now with a subscription style approach. So that might be something that might work, at least in some countries. But if we don't get the model right, we are not going to have new antimicrobials, because nobody wants to develop something that's not going to be used. You heard a lot about the new regulation on veterinary medicines. This came into force after 3 years of hard work by a lot of people in the veterinary sector around Europe. The regulation has now come into effect, and there are a number of very important measures that are intended to reduce the risk of antimicrobial resistance to public health. Some of them are quite controversial, but if properly implemented, they're going to make a difference. A couple of words then on the Svac activities. This is the work we're doing with the European Food Safety Agency and the ECDC, and to map the use of antimicrobials. And it's really making a difference, because we collect data on sales of antimicrobials from countries across Europe, and through this we see whether we're actually making a difference. And you see that from when we started, between 2011 and 2020, the sales have reduced by 43% for overall sales, 33% for third and fourth generation cephalosporins, and then 77% by polymyxins. So this is making a difference. And then what we will see now with the new veterinary regulation is that we will have different ways of collecting this data. Just to, I can't end without talking a little bit about COVID, because we see that there have been direct effects on antimicrobial resistance, because there's been decreased antimicrobial consumption during COVID-19. But in certain areas, we've seen higher rates of antibiotic use, and we've seen spikes of use in nursing homes, with increases in MRSA, for example. And of course, the testing has decreased quite dramatically, because the testing became focused on COVID. So a lot of things that we've been doing in the COVID space can also be done in the AMR space. So a lot of the investments and risk-based investment in innovator companies, this could be done. I've talked about the regulatory flexibilities and regulatory alignment. We can adopt a rolling review for authorization. We use joint procurement in Europe very, very successfully for COVID-19 vaccines. Maybe this is something we can do for potential new products. We saw we could quickly put in place publicly funded clinical trials and research and development. This is something, again, we need to do things quicker. We need to do things better. We've also seen the challenges with supply chains. We had shortages of antibiotics at the early stages of the pandemic, and we have a huge reliance on antimicrobials from outside the EU. So this is something, again, that we need to look at and see, can we do something about? So my take-home messages. So AMR is a global threat and it requires a global action, but we have to be very cognizant of the global differences. We have broad policy support, but it needs concerted and unified long-term action. You see there's a lot of support from a political level now from the pharma area under our pharma strategy, the establishment of the Health Emergency Response Authority. And we can, as regulators, we can have impact by supporting innovation and authorising in a smart way, and once authorised, making sure that there's prudent use brought in. I think the whole challenges of incentives and how we get that market, we get the business model right, that is something that we have to continue to think about. We've strong policy initiatives in the vet side, and we'll be able to see how effective those measures have been because there's built-in effectiveness KPIs into the legislation. And then we have seen a direct effect from COVID on the antimicrobial uses patterns, but it also showcases effective strategies for rapid detection of rapid development of products to market and international coordination. So let me end by reiterating the importance of a One Health approach. EMA, with your help, has a role to play in the development and authorization of human and veterinary medicines, but we also have a key role in surveillance, and we've seen that that makes a big difference. AMR knows no boundaries. It's a global approach. COVID has taught us, it's raised awareness on many, many levels around One Health. And I think we should use the momentum from the awareness that the public, and not just the medicines regulators and the policy makers have, but we need to engage the public if we're going to really tackle this as a problem. So let's use the momentum that we have, increased information about infection prevention and control, increased information about the interconnectivity. Let's use that to build a better future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Emer. An excellent talk. It describes an international perspective on this and actually how the regulators can influence, push, pull, and seek to influence the production and understand the development of new antimicrobials, new medicines. We're now moving on to the next session. This is a panel discussion. This will be chaired by my colleague, Dr. Patricia Riley, Deputy Chief Veterinary Officer, and the panellists will include Emer Brannigan, we have Roy Galley, Patricia Harrington, and Dervla Morris. So I'll ask all those to take this place on the stage, please. Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much indeed, Martin. Take a seat wherever. Okay. Thank you very much, and thank you for the segue, Emer. I'm delighted to be here this afternoon, and I hope we can have a stimulating conversation among the panelists. I'll open up for questions towards the end of the session, and just to remind everybody that the session is being recorded, just for that, so that you're aware of that if you have questions to ask. Welcome also to our online participants. Emer, you finished on a high note, I think, in terms of positivity and communication, and I think communication has been a common thread through all of the presentations this morning. And as they say, never waste a good crisis. COVID has presented us with a unique opportunity in that sense. But we've also had, ongoing issues with avian influenza, very important zoonotic implications there. Even monkeypox has been in the tabloids in recent months. So there's a greater awareness than ever around One Health. Even if people don't know they're talking about One Health, they are. And I just wonder if we might tease out a little bit that potential to capitalise on it and to improve our communications, and what anybody thinks we might be able to do to build on that momentum.
Well, maybe I'll start. I really liked what Simon said earlier about there's no better way to get a farmer to do what you want than get another farmer to talk to them. And I suppose I might mention the project about storytelling that I think is really powerful. It could be really powerful to capitalise on what you've just talked about. That Department of Health has funded a project to capture patient and staff stories that are relevant to infection control, healthcare infection, and antimicrobial resistance. And I suppose that's something that perhaps in future iterations could be useful in thinking about One Health. Could that be broadened out to One Health? We were keen, as we were developing ideas for that project, to think about people who might overlap with the One Health agenda, so people who might be living in rural communities, be affected by groundwater contamination, live in a farming area and so on, but might have had healthcare experience as well. So I think the power of storytelling can't be overstated, and may be a useful way to capitalise on that existing knowledge.
Well, that's great, thank you.
I think I'd agree certainly, because even in the point of, if you consider in terms of the work that we'd have done in relation to, say, point of care testing and that, one of the things that we would have looked at in there, the implementation of point of care testing by itself, or included an enhanced sort of communication strategy, and where that it would represent a more efficient, our estimates from that were that a more efficient use of resources if it was combined with an enhanced communication strategy, which involved the training with the GPs, working with the patients. Because a lot of the time what you're talking about is behavioural change, and it's what we've seen through the COVID pandemic, is you need to, it's all very well having the science, but you actually need to use that to inform a change in people's behaviour. Yeah. And that is going to be predicated on having really good communication, as you say, the storytelling, the relatability, and ensuring that you get that sort of sustained change in behaviour, rather than having to keep going back to the same point again and again, that you want to sustain change. So the use of evidence to drive decision-making and to drive changes in behaviour, and it involves communication of those goals, and it's across the stakeholders, and ensuring it's available in an accessible manner, ensuring that it's relatable, understandable, and as I say, because you need to communicate that right the way through, so that we reduce the demand for antibiotics as well, or certainly they reduce the demand for inappropriate antibiotic prescribing, and bring that back the way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely, it does make sense.
Can I just, I want to say something there, because I remember I was at one of these previous events that I was at, that it was driven home to me, storytelling. And this is a personal, if you like, not me, but this is, when you bring it down to the personal approach, you then really get the message over. And there was a doctor who came on with one of his patients who had pneumonia, and he was on the third antibiotic. And literally, it was the last resort. He says, if this doesn't work, you're a gunner. And it did work, and lucky, and they say. But that message really got through. So I think the personal storytelling, a simple message, that's how we're going to get through to the general public. And there's never a better time than we have now, with all the COVID language and the lingo, that people really understand it. So that's the direction I think we could well go down.
Great.
I think you have to make it real. I think in a way it's great to have conferences on One Health, but that doesn't mean anything to the patient and the farmer. You have to say what it means for you. And I think, video messages, social media messaging as well, is you can capitalize on the moment where people are more aware about infections, they're more aware about zoonotic diseases than they've ever been before. So for me, this is the time to do it, but you have to make it real. And I think the other thing is the money side, because you have to show what the cost to society of inappropriate, hospitalizations that didn't have to happen, deaths that didn't have to happen. I mean, these are things that I think we need to capitalise on.
I couldn't agree more. In a previous life, I worked in research world, and I said regularly to research experts, you don't need to convince the research ministers, you need to convince the finance ministers that this is worthwhile, because the research ministers all believe you already, but they don't necessarily have the deep pockets to pay for it. I'll move on to broaden things out a little bit further. We know that obviously through today, the One Health approach through iNAP has really started out on a very successful road, and it's working really well with antimicrobial resistance. But the concept of One Health is obviously much broader than that. So from your perspective, and I'll maybe throw it to you, Emer, to start with, what other health areas would you like to see being prioritised within the One Health framework for the various partners in the One Health space to work on together?
Yeah, so I think the most obvious area tends to be antimicrobial resistance, but looking at disease epidemiology and what the next COVID is, and whether is that going to come from an animal source, is it going to be an effect of migration of people or animals? I mean, these are things that we should be looking at a lot more in a concerted way. I know lots of people are looking at them, but they're not looking at it together. Yeah. I think more modelling, I would say, on the relationships between the environment, animal and human health could help us tackle future challenges.
I'm going to put my penny statement worth in on this one. We're an island on the western tip of Europe, and we have a lot of water around us. And we have never, we're in a unique position for biosecurity. And if I was to, wish that we could go down a direction, it is, and we are currently going down it, is the all-island approach to this country, because it is the movement of both livestock, animals and ourselves that has promoted the spread of COVID, and quite a few other diseases have come into Ireland. But of course you've then got politics coming into it, and Brexit and all that goes along with it, and then the European free trade movement, and this is where we've got to get a balance. And I would say that we need to put greater emphasis on biosecurity than we do on necessarily freedom of trade all over the place. And that's what I would like to see happening.
Okay, interesting. Dervla, do you have?
Yeah, so I suppose to build on what Emer said and also what Rory said is that, zoonoses are an important One Health problem. We know that 75% of emerging infectious diseases originate in animals. If we look outside of, I suppose, the microbiological context or infectious disease areas, and mental health and well-being is an important area that would benefit from a One Health approach. I think it's building on the learnings from COVID, building on that interdisciplinary work and getting the different actors to use the same language. Again, going back to communication, it's making sure that your message is targeted correctly and that people are all essentially singing off the same hymn sheet, or all understanding each other in the correct way. And I think that was the major benefit from the COVID response, is that people started across sectors to understand each other.
Yeah, yeah. On this side?
I think I was going to agree in relation to that, because there's a lot that happened during the context of the last 2 years, and it is preparing for, I'm not going to say the next pandemic, but those are emerging issues, and it's been something that's probably been evidenced here also in terms of the work of the Public Health Reform Group in that as well, and looking at how they can leverage off some of the learnings of the pandemic and reforming public health in Ireland. And a lot of that relates back to, the things that went well or worked well, but it was around, a lot of the learnings relate back to then having, good IT and data infrastructure, data to inform, that based on epidemiological data, but to inform decision making, so that and that those are developed, as they refer to, sort of during peacetime, rather than when a crisis happens, and then but because countries that were able to move quickly and evaluate on the move what interventions were working for them, had good good evidence bases, good data collection, and to being able to use that. But also it's around the interoperability between the different actors on the stage. And again, it's something that we saw very clearly during COVID and working with the different departments. I think we would worked research with, in terms of the antigen testing and across the meat plants with the Department of Agriculture. So there was different, actors that got together, and the veterinary departments that were actually very heavily involved in a lot of the modelling work that happened in the context of COVID for the IMAG group. So there's a lot of expertise available, but you need to get those parties working together and have those relationships sort of embedded before, and rather than waiting for them to try and leverage off them at, when there's a crisis happening. Yeah. So I think there's a lot of that sort of infrastructure, and but people are persuaded by evidence. And using that evidence to drive, and those data to drive decision making. So I think that's really important.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think the value of evidence was never stronger than it has been in the last couple of years in just the layman's world. So thank you for that. Food for thought in terms of maintaining those networks and growing them in peacetime, as you say. A wish list question. If I had a golden checkbook or an endless cryptocurrency fund, and you could choose one area of research in the One Health area, and I know I'm looking at you, Darvla, because you did a really nice mapping, and your presentation mapped a lot of priorities, but I'd love to hear from everybody what their thoughts are on focusing on again an interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary research area that they would really like to kick off, maybe with the help of EU funding.
Which would be fantastic. Yeah, I think we listed our priorities there, and we have them divided into high, medium and low, but I suppose for me it's understanding the consequences of exposure in the environment to colonisation or infection of humans or animals. I mean, we've done some work through the ARREST project, which is due to come up to an end now at the end of December. And we have very clear evidence of the introduction of antimicrobial resistance into the environment from both the human and the animal sectors. But it's to understand what the consequence is after that, I suppose. What's the impact for the animal? What's the impact for the human? And also through the ARREST project, we've generated evidence showing that different types of waste treatment processes have an impact on reducing down the introduction of antimicrobial resistant organisms and genes into the environment. But I think we need to do more work on that. It's pilot data essentially, but it's very clear evidence that integrated constructed wetlands, for example, appear to reduce down antimicrobial resistant organisms being emitted. Anaerobic digestion appears to have an impact. Again, looking at the primary, secondary and tertiary treatment of human wastes, we don't really understand yet, looking at individual populations and looking at a particular agglomeration or local authority area, what impacts those have, and they'll be important in terms of trying to mitigate against the risk of antimicrobial resistance. The other thing, sorry if I can, is the sharing of data across the sectors. So it's great to hear that there's a soil study at the moment looking at ESBL, E. coli in soils. Obviously there's lots of data in terms of ESBL producing E. coli in humans, and we have some data for the environment, but it's how do you share that data? Lots of the sectors have very high-level whole genome sequence data that would be really interesting to share if there was mechanisms to share that data across the sectors, which could be very powerful for somewhere like Ireland, because again, if you had an all-island approach, we could really understand the dynamics across the sectors and what the relationships are.
I think that will resonate with at least one person I can think of in the audience. We just in the last day or two have been talking about sharing whole genome sequencing data as regards Mycobacterium bovis.
Yeah.
It's a classic one, it's
absolutely.
It's been around for an awfully long time,
yeah.
so there's a lot to learn.
It'd be really powerful, and again, for a country like Ireland, I think it'd be really powerful, particularly again if we could do it on an all-island basis.
Maybe.
I mean, I don't know if it's hard to pick one thing, I suppose, is
okay,
one thing to say. But I just to pick up on one thing that Emer mentioned, which was about thinking about new approaches that were non-antibiotic in terms of therapeutics. So those kind of microbiome approaches and maybe bacteriophage approaches and so on. So that's one area, not areas that I know an awful lot about, but I think those are areas that are ripe for development. But again, thinking about how to incentivize them and how to to make that appealing for developers, et cetera, and researchers. But the other area that I think I'm interested in is the whole behavioural aspect. Like, what is it that works to incentivize people? Is it only money? Is it only regulation? Is it only licensing? Is it only those things? Or are there other more subtle things and softer things? Colleagues where I worked before in the Imperial Group have done a lot of almost anthropological studies and ethnographic studies about what are the cultural things that make us behave in the way that we behave and influence how we make decisions about, for example, choosing a particular course of action, and how do we negotiate that with the patient or the farmer or the vet, etc., with industry, with politicians, and so on. So I think that area is also ripe for a study and could be really useful in figuring out what are the levers, what are the incentives, what are the interventions that can help us in this area. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
I'm probably going to a little bit back to the same area again, which is in relation to using data to, and in the absence of good data, it's very difficult to drive change. But we've seen examples already then about how, the data collection in, for example, in the antimicrobial use in the long-term care setting, and being able to use that data and, reevaluate and to see, well, what's happening. Without that, without having that baseline data, it's very difficult to identify people that there is a problem, or that there's variation in practice, or that as a result of this that there can be adverse effects for individuals, or just an inefficient use of resources in the first instance. So better data collection, we very poor data in relation to sort of, I suppose, community-based prescribing with sort of silos of data. So it's around making sure that there's fewer of silos, and, as I say, with more comprehensive data, in order to be able to then, use those data to inform decision making around, for whatever interventions that you put in place, are they working? If they're not working, do you need to change track? But if you don't have those data in the first instance, it's very difficult to sort of affect change.
Working blind, yeah.
Trish,
Yes.
if you had the golden checkbook, I will give you honorary membership of the IFA's Pigs Committee.
And I would be the most popular woman in Cavan, I know.
Because I spend 95% of my time looking for more money.
Well, you did hear the big word "if" at the beginning of that question.
And I spend 5% of my time doing what I want to do, which is today. So there's a difference between, and it is down to money, if you like, there's a difference of 80 cents a kilo between us going bankrupt and us doing anything you wanted us to do for antimicrobial resistance and have our farms the very best and doing everything we should be doing. How you get that down from the marketplace to the farmer, and the difference between marketing a product and selling a commodity, and this is the laws of economics. So economics plays and politics plays into this equation enormously.
Yeah.
And I see that as one of the challenges that we have, is actually getting the farmer to be paid for what we're looking for them to do.
Fair play to you, Roy. I knew you'd get your pitch in at some stage. A point well made. And I think, that feeds back to Emer's point in her presentation about the importance of political prioritisation. And we've never had a better opportunity again with a medical doctor as president of the Commission. It's very clear in those mandate letters, not only to your commissioner, but to many others as well, that one health, one welfare message goes right across a lot of DGs and commissioners' responsibilities that maybe weren't so obvious in the past. So as we move, we have moved now from iNAP1 to iNAP2, and with a more ambitious plan even than ever before. We've heard a really wide range of presentations this morning, some great ideas. I've come away with all sorts of thoughts and notions that I hadn't before I sat down this morning. If you had one thing that you heard this morning, or indeed early this afternoon, in either the human, animal, or environmental health area, that you would like to take home to use in your own practice or in your own area of expertise, is there any message that specifically resonated with you that you think you might take back with you? Who'll start?
I can start. I think it's going back again to the communication part, the storytelling thing, and bringing it back down to talking directly to the audience that you're trying to get your message across. I really like the educational modules that the AMRIC and the HSE team and Resist have introduced, which is really, really nice. We have a schools workshop we bring out to primary schools, and I think that's another area potentially that we're possibly missing in terms of educating our children about antimicrobial resistance and also about the concepts of One Health. Separate to that, I suppose that we also need to introduce more of the concepts of One Health into our medical schools and into our veterinary schools so that professionals are aware of these concepts and know how to tackle them. So I suppose it's again, the communication piece.
Great.
I have to say I was really impressed by Roy's story because it makes it real because, I'm effectively a regulator, policy maker, and I talk about lots of things that I don't really know about, but seeing what you did, I was very, very impressed by that. And I think you showed that it can be done. Now, I don't know, you didn't get into the financials of this. Because that's...
Don't encourage them.
Trish has it all sorted. It's all right, don't worry.
That golden checkbook. I'll see you later.
But I do think there is, if we do want to change practices, we do have to think about how to incentivize them.
Okay, thank you.
I was really struck by something that reminded me about comments I read in a report recently, which was to do with back to basics of nursing, and that good nursing care was really almost an essential and integral part of infection prevention control practice, and that they shouldn't be at odds. And it was Simon's comments again about back to animal, basics, back to basics animal husbandry as a really powerful prevention tool. So it's not that it's new, and I think that's one of the challenges in the world of infection control is the messages are not new, they're never new. Even with the next virus, it's not new messages, they're the same messages. It's about how do you repackage them, and it is back to basics. It's back to spending time with and care and attention to detail, as we heard about from Roy, and attention to detail. And it's not straightforward sometimes, but those back to basics about what we know about cleanliness and time and listening and hygiene and so on. I think that really struck me. As I say, it's not new, but I think it's really important, and that really resonated with me. So,
great.
I think there's a couple of things I thought, there were so many challenges over the last number of years but in the COVID pandemic, and particularly in the context of healthcare and in terms of the delivery of healthcare. So, I mean, I'm really impressed at the level of, with the AMRIC teams, at the amount of sort of education that was pushed out, but people's engagement with it as well. And I think we did see an extraordinary buy-in. I mean, and I remember Nuala O'Connell talking about some of the webinars with the GPs, 1,400 GPs, and of 8 o'clock in the evening, and people saying, well, what are the healthcare professionals? Thinking, they're working, and they were working incredibly hard. But there was a huge amount that we were able to leverage off in terms of, I say, delivery of education, communicating, online. So using tools that probably had been used less before, but that we should now capitalise in relation to it. And we've seen it across a lot of the sectors in terms of being actually really able to push out that. But as you say, with this very core back to basic message, and sometimes it's not very sophisticated technologies that you're talking about, but I certainly was also really struck with the work around the ground well, or the private wells, and that aspect of it, and as I say, the human health aspect of it, and sort of how critically important it is for people to understand this. I suppose we politically end up having arguments about septic tanks, and people sort of thinking you're just trying to put cost onto people, and sort of saying, well, actually no, let's get back to the human cost and the consequences. But also then I suppose it's ensuring that that there's sort of equity of access across the system, and for those that are disadvantaged, that that it's resourced appropriately, and that may mean money has to be spent for money to be saved. But I mean, we ultimately know it has to be at One Health system for it to be and there has to be an equitable access across the system, so that we are targeting where need is greatest as well.
Okay, thank you.
One Health is, of course, dealing with all of us together. and the interdependence and the collaboration that we do together is so important. So my sort of one, if you like, take-home message is that while we're at this all-togetherness approach, we should be all together. And I do find that sometimes, or should we say, I think the farmer himself, who is the one who gets his feet dirty and gets his hands dirty, needs to be in those negotiations from the beginning. And I know we have the Animal Health Committee here from IFA as well, and I'd really like to see more collaboration at ground level from inception right through to finish of the ideas that we've been discussing this morning, all of whom are hugely valuable. And I sometimes think that they're all drafted and presented then at a certain stage as a fait accompli, and you just take it or leave it. And I think actually there needs to be a lot more collaboration while we're drafting and putting together all the bits of legislation that need to go into these sensible approaches that we have to AMR. So that would be my sort of, but it's definitely together, and Simon was saying it earlier on, it's all together. We should be there together. Yep.
Yeah. I think we've come a very long way in terms of public consultation and collaborative development of policy. But okay, so I've one final question, and then I'm going to open it to the floor for anybody else who might have something to ask. But and this, I suppose, Roy, is directed at you to start with, but others may have ideas. So Simon mentioned One Welfare this morning in the context of One Health. We sometimes talk about one Health, One Welfare. One Health can encompass welfare, but whatever way we package it, I think it's pretty clear that this isn't just about biological health. It's about well-being. It's about the well-being of people, of animals, and of the environment that we all occupy. So I suppose coming from your area of expertise and experience, could you comment on that welfare aspect and maybe how we might take that forward with this collaborative approach?
I have to come back to your golden checkbook, unfortunately. I would love to have, as a farmer, the Rolls-Royce farm, the Rolls-Royce piggery. Nothing would give us greater pleasure. The economics of it have driven the business to maximise our income. Currently losing 40 to 50 quid on every pig that's going out the gate. We're not in a space at the moment, and until such time as we do, and this is why I say, we would all love to have the Rolls-Royce piggery, which we can do in straw and all the bits and pieces, which involves staff, it involves, massive investment, if you like, to bring us to that space. So I have to say, I wouldn't say the welfare is compromised of pigs, because I think they're kept in as good a condition as the farmers can possibly do. And I would say all the farmers that I know of do it highly responsibly. But it is an area that, there is room for improvement. I think that would be the way to say it. I think we're never at a place where you shouldn't have and couldn't have room for improvement. And I would love to be exploring that as a collaborative talk as well. But it must be a full food chain approach to that. And once we've got a full food chain approach to making sure that we do the very, very best for our animals and for our farmers as well, because farmers come into this as well for our farmers as well.
That's the key thing, is that it's not just
that as well. So all of this has to come together.
Yeah.
And I would welcome that debate on a full food chain basis. And I'll leave it at that.
That's all right. Anybody else got any thoughts on welfare of people, plants or animals?
Well, I think it's something that really came to the fore during COVID again, just to mention COVID again.
Yeah.
And so, again, I hope it's not something that is only being talked about because of COVID and will be forgotten about when COVID becomes business as usual, which is nowish, isn't it? So yeah, I think, I don't have an answer for that, but I hope it remains a prominent focus for people when they're thinking about delivery of healthcare, is that they also think about the people delivering that healthcare and making sure that they are well in order to do that well.
Good. I'll take questions from the floor if anybody has anything they'd like to ask. I see Zara standing up with a microphone, so if you'd like to maybe say who you are and ask a succinct and clear question, that would be great.
Kindly.
The succinct bit might be a challenge, but the question
Just so long as there are no speeches, I'm happy.
So no, it'll be a question. So my name is Fidelma Fitzpatrick. I'm a consultant clinical microbiologist in Beaumont Hospital in RCSI. So if I've 2 questions, if I may, if that's all right. So the first is specifically for Emer Cook. One of the things that Jim O'Neill's report mentioned was that patients on immunosuppressants are very dependent on antibiotics to keep themselves alive. And is that a way of incentivizing development of new antibiotics? I.e., if you're going to develop a new chemotherapy drug or a new immunosuppressant, i.e., it's very expensive, built into that development and the approval will be, have you invested in antibiotics? I just thought that was a very clever angle, because you're right. Why would you invest in antibiotics if you're not going to make money? And it's back to it's down to economics. So that's the first question. And then the second question is probably for the other Emer. So part of the data, the surveillance, the stewardship, the infection control is dependent on laboratory diagnostics. And to be frank, we're in the dark ages. We're growing bugs on agar plates. And no matter how much you talk about behavioural change, if you don't get the answer fast, once you start a patient on an antibiotic, you ain't going to really change it. So have you had any thoughts about how to, I suppose, get all the laboratory, use COVID as an example, and more molecular diagnostics, not because we have the technology, but actually they're useful for patients. So 2 questions for 2 Emers, and thank you, everybody.
Well, thank you, Fidelma. And I don't have an answer other than that. It sounds like a really good idea. I would suggest that the companies developing immunomodulators don't tend to be the same companies that that have the expertise in antibiotics, but they can pair up. You know, we can look for partnerships. So I think it's something that could certainly be explored, and there's a lot more partnership development now, and people are looking at different ways of doing things and going out of their traditional areas of research and development. So it's something that I'll bring it into the debate. Thank you.
I think partnerships like the Innovative Medicines Initiative would actually be a perfect place to develop that sort of thinking. It's really interesting. Emer.
Thanks, and thanks for the question. And of course, it's an expert microbiologist asking a non-microbiologist about laboratory diagnostics. So no pressure. So no pressure. And equally, then I can also say, because Emer said she doesn't have an answer, I don't have an answer either, except to say that we bring this to the table a lot. We talk about this a lot. We talk about the need for molecular diagnostics. We talk about rapidity of diagnostics. We talk about nearness to patient of diagnostic. And I think all of those things are important and things that we continue to talk about and agitate for and try and advocate for the need for. So I don't have the answer, yes, you're going to have it, but I can say that we know it's important, we know it's a priority. You're absolutely right about getting the answer. That really important of antimicrobial stewardship is, what is the diagnostic stewardship? Do you have a test that works, that you can rely on the answer being yes or no, or being maybe, tomorrow you'll get an answer, or, information rapidly about the appropriateness of the antibiotics you're going to use. So those are things we talk about all the time and advocate for and agitate for. So that's all I can commit to at the minute. Thanks.
That's great. Anybody else got a question in the audience? Everybody has got commitments at 3:30, I suspect.
I'll comment on the diagnostics in relation to it, and it's obviously something that we looked at in relation to the other thing, and we've seen it in the context of COVID as well. I mean, there's certainly commercially, there's huge interest in developing these range of diagnostics. So we've seen it in terms of the antigen tests, and there's good tests, and then there's very poor tests. And, so obviously what we want are accurate tests that are useful for informing decision making, that they're used at the right time in the decision-making process, because you shouldn't be using if there's something that's bar none obvious, as to what, based on a clinical evaluation, that you don't need an additional test, so that just not accruing additional information without actually that being appropriate. And so it is in the context of, I think, that for the the diagnostics that we're considering and for those that are being potentially implemented is ensuring that also that they, for the most part, they need to be in the context of a sort of a quality assured framework where you actually can be assured that the test result is accurate and based on the skill set of the individual that actually is going to be delivering it at that point of care, rather than, you know, it might have been one that was developed in the laboratory, you know, delivered by laboratory trained staff based on sort of a skewed sample.
In a pristine
so
environment.
as actually ensuring, so I think, you know, certainly commercially, we know there's huge interest in sort of pushing out an awful lot of these, but we need to make sure that they're, that they can be used in a timely fashion, that that they're accurate, and as
affordable.
I say, that they affordable, but that they represent an efficient use of resources. So sometimes they may be very costly, sometimes they may be relatively cheap, but if they affect change and they represent an efficient use of resources, but we need to, as I say, you need to look at all the aspects of it, and you need to look at them in the setting that they're going to be, that they plan to be used in, to ensure that they're working in those settings to deliver the change, to deliver the answers that you actually need. That are helpful.
It's another area of commonality with the veterinary world. You know, that development of pen-side tests and tests that work efficiently, cost effectively, and reliably. Really important.
Come in there if that's okay. We're working on an OHEJP funded project called WorldCom at the moment, where we're doing exactly that, trying to develop a pen-side test to detect antimicrobial resistance, which again could cross sectors. So we're going to examine the feasibility within waters, but also there's potential for it to be used in clinical samples. It's a lamp amplification-based technology, but would have results within a very short space of time. You're talking about 20, 30 minutes. So that's ongoing at the moment. Yeah.
Great. Well, on that extremely cheerful note, Simon, please.
Yeah, I was just going to make a couple of quick comments on that. So, look, in terms of diagnostics, I think, you know, again, COVID has really sort of sharpened the mind all around. In the early stages of COVID, you know, I heard comments made from medical colleagues who were like, I never even thought you would do PCR in animals, you know, and 17025 accreditation in a veterinary lab. Wow. You know, so, you know, I think even some of that, the conversation has moved on in the last 2 years, even around levels of accreditation and the design of diagnostic tests. You know, even the fact that coronaviruses are something that as vets we deal with on a day and daily basis, whether it's, you know, whether it's cats or whether it's calves, you know, it's having those conversations in a One Health context that I think are really, really important. So I think being able to take that forward, and obviously, you know, it's sort of been touched on already, but contextualizing any results. You know, it's all very well having molecular diagnostics, but we need to think about what a PCR or a sequence result actually means, you know. So there's definitely a bit to be played out there. And just one final comment for anybody that is looking at doing anything around One Health education, I would encourage you to have a look at One Health Lessons. It's been, so onehealthlessons.com. Deborah Thompson is a trained veterinarian. She qualified from Tufts University in the States, but she happens to also be a teacher and developed some fantastic lesson plans during COVID for One Health practitioners, legal, medical, social science, vets, and a lot of students have come on board and taken those lesson plans and have taken them out into the classroom. So I would encourage you. I'm more than happy to make an introduction to anybody that would like to meet Deborah.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that. Question down the back there, Zara. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Alison Burrell. I'm a health psychologist working at Animal Health Ireland. And I just wanted to say, first of all, to all the speakers, it was great to hear your reference to social and behavioural science. My question was mainly to Emer. Firstly, to congratulate her on the behaviour change intervention that you developed in the community. I thought it was fantastic. And just wanted to ask you, was there a behaviour change framework, or was there any social behavioural scientists that were involved in that piece of research? Because it was fantastic, and it was definitely embedded with lots of really important behaviour change techniques. So well done.
Thank you, and I can't take the credit, but I'll share it on. That's a really good question, and I don't know the answer. And I guess that means probably not. But I think that we recognise that it's a gap within the skill set that's available to us in the national team. So, yeah, that's what I'll say. I don't know if, Ellen, do you know if there was a behavioural scientist, social scientist? No. Thank you, great question, but yeah, homework.
It's something.
Could I just come in on a maybe slightly different topic, if you like? This has come off here now. 1 second. We've been talking about prevention being better than cure, and I think that's a very valuable. I think Simon was saying earlier on, this is where we need to come from. So the promotion of good health, both in animals and humans, is so much the same. So things like your immune system and how we keep your immune system up to date and good, how we manage stress, how we look to have good diet, that, how we have enough sleep. So these are all little bits of the jigsaw puzzle that puts it in so we don't even have to go near antibiotics. And I think we need to do an awful lot of work, if you like, if we're into, education on how to look after ourselves as human beings. And by all means take stuff from, it's all the knowledge is there. It's just a matter of disseminating it and getting the proactive approach to use it to yourself and your family.
And more than dissemination, I think that's where the social science comes in, is making it relevant to people and accessible to people. It's something that in the Department of Agriculture we've taken on board in recent years, is the value of behavioural science and social sciences. Because we can preach the sermons for as much as we like, unless we have ways of making it relevant to people, it's pointless.
And could I say, COVID actually was great, because you saw a lot of people getting out walking, a lot of people out doing exercise, a lot of people doing healthy things. And, if we've learned something from that, brilliant. That's good.
There's an upside to everything, eh?
Yeah. There were.
Any final questions from the floor? Okay, on that, then I shall thank my panel very much for taking the time and giving some thought to those questions, some very challenging ones, I know, but and I'll just call on Martin maybe to wrap up.
Okay, thanks very much, Trish and panelists, for that. That was very interesting, and it gave an opportunity to get insights into, to tease out some more of the issues that we were discussing earlier. I had a half an hour's wrap-up speech ready. That's a lie. But I'm conscious now we're 15 minutes over our go-home time. So I'm not going to really rehearse what has actually happened during the course of the day. I really, really want to thank all the presenters for the time and effort they put into actually coming here today and sharing their experiences. In the context of setting up this meeting, it wasn't possible that we would actually capture everything that had happened in iNAP1 and what's actually happening in iNAP2. And it was a matter of selecting out various vignettes that would actually show the breadth of what's actually happening across all sectors in the animal health, the environmental, and the human health side. So you'll see actions, action happening across all the space. And I think that's very heartening. It's heartening for the people who are actually sort of coming together and trying to promote and coordinate this program. And it's heartening, I suppose, for our society to see that people are out there doing things that will actually be the benefit of society. I just want to pick up a little bit on the issue of development of medicines and issues like that. In the animal world at the moment, we're struggling with avian influenza all across the world. And one of the issues is the shall we say, the non-application of vaccination. And some of that is about pull and push, because trade sort of says, well, if you're vaccinating against avian influenza, that impacts on trade. Whereas the vaccine companies won't develop because there's no market, because, the regulatory authority, the governments or the farmers won't do that because it'll interfere with trade. So that debate has to go on. And I think, we're killing millions of birds all over the world today. Protein going to waste because of this lack of joined-up thinking. Just to go back to Roy's issue in relation to African swine fever, no vaccine available. Efforts are being made, but it's not. It's more effort is going into it now because it's actually jumped across the Atlantic which actually gets more people exercised about this. This was an African disease. It moved into Europe. It's spread across Europe. But when it actually becomes a global issue, then more effort and more research goes into this. But it does require government research funding to actually develop this. I think the issue of pen-side tests or point of care tests is something that would be of great value across both sectors, and it's something that in the context of because people need to treat the patient or the animal there and then, and anything we can do to actually support that would be good. I think we've heard about the impact of social science and the need for social science. I think at the beginning I mentioned there was five criteria or objectives that we're working on, and I think we actually spoke to all of these today. But people have come, in particular in the context of the communication, knowledge, training. You can never do enough of that. And I mean, we've had our own efforts within our own sectors. We have plenty of efforts on the medical side as well, and we have come together for communications. But I mean, it's an ongoing thing that we need to do, and communication it's not just about getting a message out there or issuing a press release or issuing a circular. It's an ongoing engagement. It has to be a two-way communication, and that's challenging because that is resource hungry, and like, I'm sorry to say, Roy, we don't have the money either. So anyway, I want to thank you all for coming along. Thank all the people online who've actually linked in. Really, really great conference. I really want to pay tribute again to the folk who actually put all this together. Really, really thankful. And again, to the contributors and the presenters. So thanks very much, and safe home.